Caleb Rourke trudged through knee-deep snow, hunting rifles slung over his shoulder, searching for tracks in the pristine Montana wilderness. Then he heard it, a pained whimper, coming from beneath a fallen pine, where he discovered a small, shivering bundle of black fur, its leg caught in a cruel steel trap. For 3 days and nights, Caleb nursed the wounded pup back to health in his cabin, until the morning he woke to find the animal had vanished without a trace, leaving only blood-stained bandages behind. 7 years later, Caleb stood frozen on his porch, staring at the massive paw prints circling his home and the torn remains of his neighbor's prized hunting dogs. The realization of what he had actually saved that winter night made his blood run cold. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Talenest, Montana wasn't the kind of place you'd find on a postcard. Despite its breathtaking mountain views and dense pine forests, it was a hard-scrabble town of just under 2,000 souls. Mostly loggers, hunters, and folks who preferred their privacy to city conveniences. Winter lasted 8 months of the year here, and the locals had learned to be as hardy and unyielding as the land itself. Caleb Rourke fit right in, though he wasn't born to this place. At 42, the former Marine sniper carried the weight of his 3 tours in Afghanistan in the slight limp of his left leg and the distant look that sometimes clouded his grey eyes. He'd bought the old Dempsey property 7 years ago, 5 acres, with a sturdy log cabin set back from the road, bordered by national forest on 2 sides. The townsfolk had initially viewed him with suspicion, but his quiet competence and willingness to lend a hand had eventually earned their grudging respect, if not their friendship. His wife, Lena Rourke, was different. Where Caleb was all hard edges and silence, Lena brought warmth to any room she entered. At 39, her chestnut hair was already threaded with silver, but her hazel eyes still crinkled when she smiled, which she did often, despite everything. The elementary school had been thrilled to hire her as their new art teacher when the Rourkes first arrived. The children adored her, and even the most tight-lipped locals found themselves opening up to her gentle questions. They'd come to Talenest to heal. After Caleb's medical discharge, the doctors had recommended somewhere quiet. What they really meant was somewhere far from crowds, sudden noises and triggers that sent Caleb spiraling back to dusty streets and split-second decisions that had cost lives. For a while it had worked. Caleb found peace in the woods, hunting for their table, and occasionally guiding tourists during hunting season. Lena had thrived teaching art and starting a community garden project. Then came Lena's diagnosis, a rare form of aggressive cancer that started in her bone marrow. The nearest specialized treatment center was 4 hours away in Missoula. Weekly treatments left her exhausted, her once vibrant face now gaunt. The medical bills mounted, and throughout it all, Sheriff Cole Hadley watched Caleb with undisguised suspicion, as if waiting for the former soldier to crack under the pressure. Only old Dr. Malcolm Easton, the town's veterinarian for nearly 40 years, showed genuine compassion for their situation, though lately even he seemed troubled whenever he visited their home. 7 years earlier, winter had descended on Talenest with unusual ferocity. By early November, snow already lay 3 feet deep in the valleys, with drifts twice that height where the wind sculpted the landscape. Caleb remembered that day with crystal clarity, the kind of perfect recall that usually only came with his worst combat memories. He'd set out at dawn to check his traps, more out of necessity than sport. Lena's teaching salary stretched only so far, and game meat filled their freezer through the long winters. The temperature had plummeted overnight to 20 below, and his breath crystallized instantly in his beard. He'd been following a set of elk tracks for nearly 2 hours when the storm hit without warning, a white wall of snow and wind that reduced visibility to arm's length within minutes. Caleb knew better than to panic. He'd survived worse conditions in the Hindu Kush. Using his compass, he began the careful trek back toward his cabin, fighting through deepening snow. That's when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the howling wind. A whimper, high-pitched and trembling, coming from a cluster of fallen pines to his right. His first instinct was to keep moving. In these conditions, stopping too long meant death. But something in that sound, the raw pain and fear, pulled at him. Caleb altered his course, pushing through snow-laden branches until he spotted a dark shape huddled against the trunk of a massive pine. At first, he thought it was a coyote pup, but the size wasn't right. Too big for a coyote kit, too small for an adult. When it raised its head weakly, Caleb saw a pair of startling amber eyes in a face that resembled a German shepherd puppy, though something about the proportions seemed off. Its right hind leg was caught in a trap, not one of Caleb's humane restraints, but an old-style steel jaw trap that had nearly severed the limb. Blood stained the snow beneath it. "Easy there," Caleb murmured, approaching slowly. The pup bared its teeth in a feeble threat display. "Not gonna hurt you. Looks like someone else already did that job." Getting the trap open with gloved hands in the freezing cold proved nearly impossible. Caleb finally removed his gloves, his fingers burning and then going numb as he forced the rusted mechanism apart. The pup didn't struggle or bite, watching him with those unnerving amber eyes that seemed too knowing for a young animal. Wrapping the bleeding creature in his spare thermal shirt, Caleb tucked it inside his jacket and resumed his trek home. The added weight was unwelcome in these conditions, but something wouldn't let him leave the creature to die. Perhaps it was the way it had looked at him, not with the blank animal stare he was accustomed to, but with what seemed like understanding. The storm worsened. What should have been a 2-hour walk stretched to 5 grueling hours. Twice, Caleb stumbled to his knees, his old leg wound, screaming in protest. Each time, he felt the pup shift against his chest as if encouraging him to continue. By the time his cabin came into view through the whiteout, Caleb's extremities were dangerously numb and his vision had begun to tunnel, the first signs of hypothermia. Lena's horrified face greeted him at the door. She helped him to the fireplace, peeling off his frozen outerwear, exclaiming when the blood-soaked bundle fell from his jacket onto the hearth rug. "Caleb, what on earth? A trap?" He managed through chattering teeth. Couldn't leave it. While Caleb thawed by the fire, Lena examined the pup. Her gentle hands probed the mangled leg, her brow furrowed with concern. "This needs a vet, Caleb. I don't have the supplies to treat this." "Roads'll be closed," Caleb said, finally regaining some warmth. "Storm's too bad." Lena bit her lip, then nodded decisively. "I'll call Dr. Easton. Maybe he can talk us through it." Trevor Callahan arrived 3 hours later, his ancient Bronco somehow navigating roads that should have been impassable. The old veterinarian stomped snow from his boots at the door, his white beard making him look like a lean, stern Santa Claus. He set his medical bag on the kitchen table and approached the pup, now lying on a clean towel by the fire. Caleb Rourke would never forget the expression that crossed Callahan's face when he first examined the animal, a flicker of something like recognition, quickly masked by professional concern. The vet's gnarled hands were gentle as he cleaned and examined the wound. "Trap did a real number on him," Callahan muttered. "Surprised he's still alive. He's lost a lot of blood." "Can you save the leg?" Lena asked. Callahan shook his head. "Too much damage. I'll have to amputate below the joint. He might always have a limp, but he should adapt." That night, their kitchen became an impromptu operating room. Caleb held the sedated pup still, while Callahan worked with practiced efficiency. When it was done, the vet looked troubled as he packed his instruments. "What kind of dog is he?" Lena asked, stroking the sleeping animal's head. "Hard to say," Callahan replied, not meeting her eyes. "Some kind of shepherd mix. Maybe northern breed for sure. Given that coat," he hesitated. "You planning to keep him?" "Just until he heals," Caleb said. "Then we can find him a home." Callahan nodded, but his expression remained guarded. "You call me if he shows any unusual behaviors. You hear any aggression at all." 3 days later, the pup, now named Shadow for his dark coat and silent movements, was already putting weight on his remaining 3 legs, recovering with remarkable speed. On the 4th morning, Caleb woke to find Lena shaking him urgently. "Shadow's gone," she said. "The back door's open." They searched for hours, but the only traces they found were bloodied bandages in the snow and a single set of 3-legged tracks leading toward the forest before disappearing in fresh snowfall. 5 years passed after Shadow's disappearance. Caleb and Lena gradually accepted the loss, assuming the injured animal had either perished in the wilderness or found a new home. Life in Talenest settled into a comfortable rhythm, until the morning Caleb discovered the first unusual track circling their cabin. Initially, he dismissed them as belonging to one of the grey wolves that occasionally moved through the area, though something about their size troubled him. At nearly 6 inches across, they were larger than any wolf print he'd encountered during his hunting expeditions. When the tracks reappeared 3 nights in a row, always circling the cabin but never approaching closer than 20 yards, Caleb began to wonder. "You're imagining things," Lena told him, with a gentle smile when he mentioned his concerns. Her face was thinner now, the treatments taking their toll, but her eyes remained bright with the stubborn optimism that had first drawn him to her. Wolves don't fixate on specific houses. It's probably just following game trails. Caleb wanted to believe her, but his military instincts, the same ones that had kept him alive in combat, were signaling that something deliberate was happening around their property. He began setting up motion-activated game cameras at the perimeter of their land. For 2 weeks, the cameras captured nothing unusual, just the expected deer, a few coyotes, the occasional moose ambling through. Then, on a moonlit night in late November, the southwestern camera triggered. The resulting image made Caleb's coffee mug slip from his fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. The photograph showed an enormous black wolf, one rear leg noticeably shorter than the others, its amber eyes reflecting the camera's infrared flash. It wasn't the animal's size that shocked Caleb, though it was clearly massive. It was the distinctive white patch on its chest, shaped exactly like the marking on the pup he'd rescued years before. That same day, Frederick Tanner, who ran the hunting lodge 3 miles down the road, stormed up to Caleb's door, his weathered face flushed with anger beneath his ever-present camouflage cap. "Your dog killed 2 of my best hounds last night, Rourke," he spat, jabbing a finger at Caleb's chest. "I don't have a dog, Fred. You know that." "Then what the hell is that beast folks have been seeing around your property? Half the town's talking about it." Caleb's stomach tightened. "What beast?" "Big black thing. My guide Ronnie saw it watching your place from the ridgeline 2 days ago. Said it was the biggest damn wolf he'd ever seen, if it even was a wolf." Tanner's eyes narrowed. "Whatever it is, it ripped apart my 2 championship blue ticks when they were running a scent trail that passed near your land. $5,000 worth of hunting dog, dead in minutes." Caleb offered to help pay for the dogs, but Tanner wasn't interested in money. He wanted the animal destroyed. As the man stomped back to his truck, Caleb noticed Sheriff Brennan Walker parked on the access road, watching the interaction with undisguised interest. That evening, Caleb drove to the veterinary clinic on the edge of town. Dr. Callahan was just closing up, his arthritic movements slower than they had been 5 years ago. The old vet's eyes sharpened when Caleb described what he'd seen on the game camera. "You still have the image?" Callahan asked, his voice carefully neutral. Caleb handed over his phone. Callahan studied the photo, his lined face unreadable. "Could be any black wolf," he said finally, returning the phone. "They pass through these parts occasionally. With a deformed rear leg, with exactly the same white chest marking as the pup I rescued." Caleb leaned forward. "Doc, what aren't you telling me? You had a strange reaction when you first treated Shadow, like you recognized what he was." Callahan busied himself cleaning instruments that already gleamed. "Lot of large canids in these mountains, Caleb. Not my place to speculate." Before Caleb could press further, the clinic door opened. Ranger Jack Talbot stepped in, shaking rain from his green Forest Service jacket. Talbot was new to the area, having transferred from Yellowstone 2 years earlier, in his mid-30s, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. The ranger had always been cordial, but distant with Caleb. "Rourke," Talbot acknowledged with a nod before turning to Callahan. "Got those medications ready for the research station, Doc?" An uncomfortable silence fell. Caleb looked between the 2 men, sensing an unspoken communication. "What research station?" he asked. "Wildlife monitoring post," Talbot replied too quickly. "Up near the state line. We track migration patterns, population health, that sort of thing." Caleb might have accepted the explanation if not for the warning glance Callahan shot the ranger. "Strange coincidence, you being here?" Talbot continued, his tone deliberately casual. "I was planning to stop by your place tomorrow. We've had reports of an unusually large predator in your area, possibly a wolf hybrid or an illegally released captive wolf. Wondered if you'd seen anything unusual." Caleb thought of the picture on his phone, of Fred Tanner's dead hunting dogs. "Nothing definitive," he lied, unsure why he felt compelled to protect the animal. "Just some large tracks." Talbot nodded, but his eyes said he didn't believe Caleb. Well, if you do, call me immediately. Don't approach it. Wolf hybrids can be unpredictable, especially if they've bonded with humans before. The following week brought a heavy snowfall, and Caleb used the opportunity to track the mysterious animal. The distinctive three-legged prince led him 5 miles into the national forest to a sheltered ravine where the snow was less deep. There, Caleb found evidence that turned his understanding upside down. The ravine contained the remains of 3 deer, expertly taken down and butchered with an efficiency no ordinary wolf could manage. But it wasn't the kills that disturbed Caleb, it was the careful arrangement. The carcasses had been positioned in a semicircle, the unusable parts buried rather than left exposed. At the center of the formation was a smooth stone with unmistakable scratch marks, deliberate lines that couldn't possibly be natural. As Mason knelt to examine the scene, the hair on the back of his neck rose. He was being watched. Slowly he raised his head and scanned the ridge above him. There, partially concealed by a stand of pine, stood the enormous black wolf. Even at this distance, Mason could see the intelligence in those amber eyes and something else, something that seemed impossible. Recognition. Without thinking, Mason spoke aloud. "Shadow." The wolf's ears prickled forward. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the animal turned and melted into the forest with a silent grace that belied its size. That night, Mason finally told Haley everything. The tracks, the game camera photo, his encounter in the ravine. He expected skepticism, but found none. "I felt something watching over us," she admitted. "On my bad days, when you were out getting supplies, I'd see movement at the forest edge. It made me feel protected somehow." Mason remembered Calloway's warning from years ago. "Call me if he shows any unusual behaviors." The vet had known all along what Shadow truly was, and now, Mason suspected, so did Ranger Thompson. The winter Mason discovered Shadow's return was also when Haley's health took its first serious downturn. The cancer had been in remission for nearly 3 years, a miracle, her oncologist had called it, but routine blood work in January showed troubling markers. The treatments would need to resume, more aggressive this time. Mason found himself dividing his attention between caring for his wife and trying to understand the mystery of the wolf that had once been a wounded pup in his home. He set up more game cameras, capturing occasional glimpses of Shadow moving through their property, always at a distance, always watching. The wolf never approached the house directly when Mason was present, but Haley insisted she sometimes saw him through the kitchen window on days when Mason drove into Missoula for her treatments. "He stands at the edge of the clearing," she told Mason one evening as they sat before the fire, her thin frame wrapped in a quilt despite the warmth of the room. "Just watching. When I wave, he disappears." Mason might have dismissed it as medication-induced imagination, if not for the tracks he found the next morning. Massive paw prints leading right up to the kitchen window, then circling the entire cabin before heading back into the forest. Sheriff Walker began making more frequent passes by their property, often parking his cruiser at the access road for hours. When Mason confronted him, Walker claimed he was just keeping an eye on things with Haley being sick and all. But his eyes told a different story. The sheriff was watching for Shadow. As winter deepened, rumors spread through Talenest. Frederick Tanner wasn't the only one to lose hunting dogs. 3 more hounds disappeared over a 2-week period. In December, their tracking collars were found neatly piled at the edge of Mason's property, not a drop of blood on them. Livestock began to go missing from outlying farms, always taken cleanly, always from properties where the owners had been vocal about wanting the black devil wolf destroyed. Local opinions divided sharply. Some residents viewed the wolf as a menace to be eliminated. Others, particularly those who'd lived in the area for generations, spoke of it with superstitious respect. Mason found himself caught in the middle, unwilling to betray Shadow's existence, yet increasingly concerned about the animal's behavior. "It's like he's sending a message," Mason told Haley. "After the incident with the tracking collars, like he knows exactly what he's doing." "Maybe he does," Haley replied, her eyes distant. "I've been reading about wolves. They're far more intelligent than we give them credit for, capable of complex social behavior, long-term planning," she squeezed his hand, "and loyalty that spans years." Against the backdrop of community tension, Haley's health stabilized unexpectedly. Her blood work showed marginal improvement, enough that her doctor in Missoula reduced the frequency of her treatments. The change coincided with an increase in Shadow's activity around their property. One February morning, Mason ventured into his workshop to find a freshly killed rabbit placed precisely in the center of the doorway, not mauled or partially eaten, but killed with a single bite to the neck and left intact. The same thing happened 3 days later, and then again the following week. Always clean kills, always placed where Mason would find them, always when their freezer was getting low on meat. "He's providing for us," Haley said, her eyes bright with an almost feverish excitement. "Like we cared for him?" Mason wasn't sure what to believe anymore. His military training had taught him to trust observable facts, not mystical interpretations. But Shadow's behavior defied rational explanation. No wild wolf, even one that had been briefly domesticated as a pup, should be capable of such deliberate actions. Dr. Calloway continued to evade Mason's direct questions about Shadow, though the old vet's concern for Haley seemed genuine. He began making house calls to check on her, refusing payment, bringing herbal teas he claimed might help with the treatment side effect. During these visits, his eyes constantly drifted to the windows, as if expecting to see something watching from the tree line. The situation came to a head in early March when 10-year-old Abigail Foster went missing during a school hiking trip in the National Forest. The child had wandered away from the group while collecting pine cones, and by the time her absence was noticed, a light snow had already begun to cover her tracks. Sheriff Walker organized search parties, but as darkness fell and temperatures dropped, hope dwindled. Mason joined the search, his combat tracking skills making him more effective than most of the volunteers. Near midnight, working with a team led by Ranger Thompson, he picked up faint indications of the girl's passage. A broken twig here, a displaced stone there, heading deeper into the mountains, away from the search area. "She's disoriented," Mason told Thompson, moving uphill instead of down toward the road. Thompson nodded grimly. In this cold without shelter, he left the thought unfinished. They pressed on, fighting through increasingly rough terrain. Around 2 a.m., Mason spotted something that made his heart race, a large canine track overlapping the child's fading footprints. He knelt for a closer look, recognizing instantly the distinctive pattern of Shadow's three-legged gait. "Thompson," he called, "look at this." The ranger crouched beside him, studying the tracks with a hooded flashlight. His expression revealed nothing. "Wolf," he said flatly, following the girl. Mason met his eyes. "You know it's not just any wolf." For a moment, Thompson's professional mask slipped. "We need to hurry," was all he said, rising to his feet. They found Abigail 20 minutes later, curled inside a hollow fallen log, wrapped in what appeared to be an old hunter's jacket that someone had left in a nearby blind. She was cold, but unharmed, and remarkably calm for a child who'd spent hours lost in a freezing forest. "The big dog showed me where to hide," she told them, as Thompson carried her down the mountain. He was scary looking, but nice. Sheriff Walker was waiting at the trailhead, his cruiser's flashing lights painting the snow in sharp blue and red. He listened to Abigail's story with narrowed eyes, then pulled Mason aside. "This dog she's talking about, you wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Blackwood?" Mason kept his face neutral. "Lots of things in these woods, Sheriff." Walker's hand rested meaningfully on his sidearm. "Well, whatever it is, I've got 6 ranchers ready to form a hunting party. That animal's gotten too comfortable around humans. It's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt." As Abigail's rescue spread through Pinarest, public opinion began to shift. The black wolf was no longer universally feared. The Foster family publicly thanked the guardian angel that saved their daughter, but others weren't convinced, Frederick Tanner among them. He began organizing weekend hunting expeditions aimed specifically at the wolf. Through it all, Shadow kept his nightly patrols around Mason's property. The game cameras caught him more frequently now, sometimes lingering clearly in view, almost as if he no longer cared about being seen. But Mason noticed something troubling, a raw, open wound on Shadow's shoulder, about the size of a silver dollar, that hadn't been there before. Concerned, Mason hiked out to the ravine where he'd first seen Shadow up close. The place showed signs of recent activity. fresh deer remains, and the strange arrangements of stones. As he examined the site, something half buried in the soft earth caught his eye, a small metal cylinder brushing away dirt. Mason recognized it immediately from his military days, a subcutaneous tracking device like the kind used for high-value targets in the field. It was smeared with blood and bits of black fur. His mind raced. Someone had tracked Shadow, had gotten close enough to implant this device. The wound in the photos wasn't from a hunter's bullet or a predator's fight. It was where Shadow had torn the tracker out of his own flesh. That evening, as spring storms battered the cabin, Mason finally confronted Dr. Calloway. The vet had just delivered more of his special tea for Haley. Mason waited until Haley had gone to rest before showing Calloway the bloodied cylinder. "You want to tell me what's really going on, Doc?" Mason asked, setting the device on the kitchen table. Calloway's weathered face seemed to age another decade as he stared at it. "Where did you find this?" "You know where. But what I don't get is why Shadow had it embedded, and why you've been lying to me about what he really is." The old vet sank into a chair, looking every bit his 65 years. "It's complicated, Mason. I've got all night." Calloway sighed, rubbing a gnarled hand over his face. "That animal you found? He's not just any wolf, he's part of a bloodline thought extinct in this region, a subspecies of North American black wolf that once roamed the northern Rockies. You knew this when you brought him to me." Calloway nodded. "I suspected the markings, his size even as a pup. Only a handful of pure bloodlines remain, mostly in remote parts of Canada. They're bigger than grey wolves, smarter, incredibly rare. When you told me where you found him, I knew someone had tried to trap him deliberately." "Who?" Calloway's eyes flicked toward the window, rain lashing against the glass. "There's a group of researchers with the University of Montana and Fish and Wildlife Service. They track the last known breeding pairs of these wolves. I've helped when I can." Mason's anger surged. "So you've been using my property to monitor Shadow. What about this?" He held up the tracker. "That's not from the research team," Calloway said, his expression darkening. "They use radio collars. Visible tags. This is military-grade tech." "Then who?" "Private interests. People who've learned certain things about these wolves." Mason leaned forward. "What things?" Calloway hesitated, then seemed to decide. "Their blood. Certain glands, even saliva, they contain compounds not found in other subspecies, compounds with medical potential." Mason thought of Haley's sudden remission, how she improved whenever Shadow was nearby. "What kind of medical potential?" "Mostly immune system modulation. Early research shows promise for treating aggressive cancers and autoimmune disorders." Calloway met Mason's eyes steadily. "The kind of cancer Haley has." The weight of that hung between them until Mason broke the silence. "You're saying these wolves could help cure her?" "I'm saying they might already be," Calloway replied quietly. "The teas I bring, I incorporate trace elements from plants around the wolves' territory. It's unorthodox, off the books, but I've seen results in her blood work." Mason's mind reeled. "Does Ranger Thompson know about this?" "Jack's with the research team. His position in the Forest Service lets him monitor the wolves officially." Calloway leaned in. "Mason, you need to understand, these wolves are valuable, scientifically and commercially. There are people who'd pay millions for a live specimen or even tissue samples. That tracker, it's almost certainly from private hunters hired to capture one, like the men who killed Tanner's dogs." Calloway shook his head. "Number Shadow did that himself. He's systematically eliminating threats around your property. The dogs, the livestock from farms calling for hunts. He's creating a buffer zone, protecting territory." The vet paused. "Protecting you and Haley." Mason remembered the careful stone arrangements in the ravine, the offerings left at his workshop door. "Why us?" "Because you saved him years ago. Wolves don't forget, especially these wolves. They form bonds that last lifetimes. You didn't just save him, you became family." Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling around the cabin eaves, sounding almost like a wolf's call. 3 days later, Mason woke to find Haley's side of the bed empty. Panic surged until he saw her silhouette through the frosted kitchen window, standing on the back porch wrapped in her heavy robe, talking to someone or something at the edge of the clearing. By the time Mason pulled on clothes and came downstairs, Haley was alone, her face lit by an emotion he couldn't immediately place. Joy, maybe wonder. "He was here," she said, when Mason asked why she was outside in the cold. Right there, at the tree line. He let me see him up close. Mason scanned the forest edge, but as usual, Shadow had vanished by his approach. Haley, it's not safe. He's still wild. She turned to him, eyes sharp, despite the fatigue shadowing them. No, he's not. Not entirely. And I think he's been helping me. What do you mean? I always feel better when he's around, stronger. She gestured toward the woods. There's something about him, something healing. Before Mason could respond, his phone rang. Ranger Thompson's voice was tight with urgency. Mason, keep an eye out. Tanner's organizing a big hunting party. They say it's for mountain lions, but I know they're after your wolf. They've got dogs, ATVS, high-powered rifles. They can't hunt wolves legally. They don't care, not after what happened at the Miller farm last night. What happened? Something killed their prized bull, tore its throat out. They're blaming the black wolf. Mason felt a chill. Shadow wouldn't do that. Maybe not, but someone wants it to look that way. I've got to go. Be careful. This is getting dangerous. As spring crept into the mountains, melting snow and bringing new shoots, tension in Talenest continued to build. Mason found himself caught deeper and deeper in an impossible situation, caught in a tangled web of loyalties to Lily, whose health had become mysteriously intertwined with Eclipse's presence, to the wolf himself, waging his own silent war against unseen enemies, and to the town where they'd made their home, now deeply divided over the so-called shadow wolf. Mason found himself standing at a crossroads he hadn't even seen coming. What he didn't realize was that the confrontation he feared was already unfolding, set in motion by forces far beyond his grasp. Soon he would be forced to choose between guarding the creature who'd come back to repay a long-ago debt and preserving the fragile life he was building with Lily. Somewhere in the shadowed mountains, others were closing in on Eclipse's territory, drawn by the very technology the wolf had fought so hard to shed. The backup tracker still lodged deep beneath his skin, quietly pinging each night as he made his faithful rounds around the Blackwood cabin. 2 years after Eclipse's return, the precarious balance Mason had kept between shielding the wolf and keeping peace with the community shattered one crisp autumn morning. Mason was splitting firewood when Sheriff Cole's cruiser rolled up his driveway, followed by Victor Grayson's mud-splattered pickup and 3 other unfamiliar vehicles. Setting down his axe, Mason felt the familiar stir of trouble. Sheriff Cole stepped forward alone, his face tight beneath his worn cap. "Got a situation," he said. "Blackwood," Cole continued without hesitation. "Game warden found 3 dead elk up by Raven Ridge yesterday. Killed, but not eaten, just arranged in some kind of pattern." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. There was writing in the dirt nearby, letters scratched into the ground. Mason's skin crawled despite the cool autumn air. What kind of writing? An L? Just the letter L. Clear as day. Cole's gaze locked on Mason's. "You want to tell me how a wolf learns to write letters?" Mason's breath caught. L, Lily's first initial. Before Mason could reply, Grayson climbed from his truck, a scoped rifle cradled casually in his arms. 5 other men emerged from the vehicles behind him, all armed. "Time's up, Blackwood," Grayson called. "That shadow wolf crossed a line. We're putting it down today." Mason stepped forward, blocking their path to the house where Lily was resting after her latest treatment. "You're not hunting anything on my property." Grayson smiled coldly. "Don't need to." One of the other men spoke up. It was Roy Miller, whose prized bull had been slaughtered months before. "We've tracked it to that old mining ravine on the North Ridge. Got it cornered." Mason's heart pounded. The ravine, Eclipse's sanctuary. "That's federal land. You can't hunt there without permits." Sheriff Cole raised a placating hand. "Look, Mason, I get you're attached to this animal, but this isn't normal behavior. Experts say no wolf kills like this, or arranges things in patterns. Might be rabies or parasites. It needs to be put down before someone gets hurt." "They haven't examined Eclipse," Mason argued. "They're just guessing." Grayson spat on the ground. "Call it what you want," Cole's radio crackled. After a moment, his face hardened. "That was Ranger Thompson. Forest Service is issuing an emergency removal order. They're sending a team but won't be here for hours. You boys have county permission to proceed, but I'm coming with you. This gets done by the book." Mason felt control slipping away. "At least let me come. I might be able to stop this." The hunters exchanged skeptical looks, but Cole nodded. "Fine, but you follow my lead. First sign of trouble, you back off." Mason hurried inside to find Lily already dressed, pale but resolute. "I heard," she said. "I'm coming too." "You can't," Mason said. "You're too weak. This is about Eclipse." She gripped his arm with surprising strength. "I'm not sitting here while they kill him." No argument could sway her. Mason helped her into her warm coat, silently praying they weren't too late. The convoy rumbled up logging roads into the forest, veering onto rougher trails as they neared Raven Ridge. Mason and Lily rode with Sheriff Cole. Grayson's group followed in their trucks, the beds carrying hunting dogs in wire cages. "Those dogs won't help," Mason whispered. "Eclipse is too smart." Cole shot him a sidelong glance. "You sure about what this animal can and can't do?" "I know wolves," Mason said, leaving it at that. They parked where the trail ended and continued on foot. Lily insisted on walking, though each step clearly pained her. The hunters spread out with rifles ready, releasing 2 blue tick hounds to track the scent. The dogs whined, circling back instead of charging ahead. Finally, Grayson let loose his prized redbone coonhound, a scarred veteran. The dog sniffed the air, growled low, then charged up the trail toward the ravine. "That's better," Grayson grinned. They were halfway to the ravine when the redbone's excited baying turned into a high-pitched yelp of terror, then silence. The hunters quickened their pace, cresting a rise to find the dog trembling beneath a pine, growling at its own master.
"What the hell?" Grayson muttered. Mason scanned the forest, feeling unseen eyes on them. "He's watching," Miller snorted. "Just a predator sizing us up." "No," Mason said, shaking his head. "He's warning us." From the ravine came a deep, resonant howl that rolled across the mountains. Nothing like the sharp cries of common wolves Mason had heard before. It was primal, ancient. The hunters instinctively closed ranks. "Jesus," one whispered. "What kind of wolf sounds like that?" The howl came again, closer. Cole drew a sidearm. "Stay together. If it charges, aim for center mass." Mason stepped forward, ignoring Cole's warning. "Eclipse," he called softly. "It's me, Mason." Silence. Even the birds held their breath. Then movement, a subtle rustling to their left. Eclipse stepped into a shaft of sunlight. Mason felt Lily's breath hitch behind him. The wolf had grown even larger since their last close encounter. His broad shoulders nearly waist high. His midnight black coat gleamed with health, marked only by the faded scar on his shoulder and the missing hind leg that slowed him not at all. His amber eyes, sharp and wary, flicked from Mason to the armed men, then locked on Lily. "My God," Cole breathed. "That's not a normal." The wolf. Carter raised his rifle. "Doesn't matter what it is, it's dead." "Lower your weapon," Lane ordered, stepping firmly between Carter and Midnight. "He's not threatening anyone." "Move!" "Grayson," Miller growled. "That beast killed my prize bull. Did you see it happen?" Lane challenged. "Or just find your bull dead and assume?" Midnight took a slow step forward. Fully in the clearing now, Lane saw the powerful muscles rippling beneath the midnight black coat. The wolf positioned himself carefully, not aggressive, but calculated, keeping the most dangerous hunters within his sight. Suddenly, the forest behind him exploded with the sounds of engines and shouting men. Ranger Jensen appeared on the trail, accompanied by 4 fish and wildlife officers and a civilian. "Stand down," Jensen shouted at Carter's group. "This animal is protected under federal jurisdiction." Confusion rippled through the hunters. Sheriff Walker turned to Jensen, flushed with anger. "What the hell are you talking about? Your office just gave us the green light." "New information," Jensen said curtly. "Dr. Callahan contacted our research division with critical data on this animal. It's not to be harmed." The gray-haired stranger stepped forward, eyes locked on Midnight with fascinated awe. "My God," he murmured. "The size, the coat, he's perfect." Lane didn't like the tone. "Who are you?" "Dr. Ellis Harmon, Wildlife Biology, University of Montana." The man replied without looking away from Midnight. "We've tracked black wolf populations for 20 years. This specimen," he raised his tranquilizer rifle slightly. "We need to tag and study him." "The hell you will," Carter spat. "That thing's been terrorizing this county for 2 years." As the argument heated, Lane noticed Midnight's attention shift fully to Evelyn. The wolf took a cautious step toward her, and to Lane's alarm, Evelyn moved to meet him, breaking away from Sheriff Walker's protective stance. "Evelyn," Lane called, but she seemed not to hear. Walker reached for her arm. "Mrs. Grayson, stay back." Before he could touch her, Midnight became a black blur of motion, placing himself directly between Evelyn and the sheriff. The wolf didn't growl or bare teeth, but his message was clear. "Don't touch her." Walker stumbled back, drawing his gun smoothly. "Everyone back up, Doctor." Harmon raised his tranquilizer rifle, but Jensen knocked the barrel aside. "Wait." Lane watched, astonished. As Evelyn knelt calmly beside Midnight, her hand reaching out, the massive wolf lowered his head, allowing her to stroke the thick fur behind his ears. "It's okay," she said softly, whether to the wolf or the frightened men. Lane wasn't sure. He's not here to hurt anyone. Harmon's scientific detachment shattered. This is unprecedented. The socialization level, the selective aggression patterns. Selective nothing, Miller snapped. "He's a killer, not of humans," Lane countered. "Not once has he harmed a person. He even protected Abigail Foster." Midnight remained perfectly still under Evelyn's touch, but his eyes tracked every movement of the armed men. Lane could see the animal was ready to move at any threat, not to flee, but to defend Evelyn fiercely. The standoff might have lasted forever, if not for what happened next. Evelyn, kneeling beside Midnight, suddenly gasped, clutching her chest, face paling, and collapsed against the wolf's side. "Evelyn!" Lane rushed forward, ignoring the massive predator. Midnight shifted his weight to better support her slumping form. "She needs help," Lane shouted, gathering Evelyn in his arms. Her breathing was shallow, her skin clammy with sudden sweat. "It's her heart, a side effect of the treatments." Walker immediately holstered his weapon. "I'll radio for medevac." He hurried back toward the trail. In the confusion, Lane barely noticed Carter and his men backing away, their hunt forgotten in the face of human crisis. Jensen and the wildlife team moved forward to help, but Midnight growled low in his throat, stopping them cold. "Back off," Lane warned, cradling Evelyn. "All of you. He won't let you near her right now." To everyone's surprise, Midnight paced alongside Lane as he carried Evelyn back down the trail, his body language protective, not threatening. When they reached the vehicles, Walker had already contacted the emergency helicopter service from Missoula. 20 minutes out, he reported. "How's she doing?" "Not good." Lane laid Evelyn in the back of Walker's cruiser. Her breathing was labored, her pulse rapid and weak. "I don't know if she has 20 minutes. Throughout the agonizing wait, Midnight remained close, ignoring the weary stares of hunters, and wildlife officials gathered at a respectful distance. The wolf's amber eyes never left Evelyn's pale face. When the helicopter appeared over the ridge, descending toward a small clearing by the logging road, Lane expected Midnight to flee from the noise and commotion. Instead, the wolf stayed until paramedics had loaded Evelyn onto a stretcher, backing away only when they moved her toward the waiting aircraft. As the rotor spun faster, preparing for takeoff, Lane faced an impossible choice: go with his wife or stay to protect Midnight from the still-armed hunters. Before he could decide, Dr. Callahan's ancient Bronco roared up the logging road, sliding to a stop beside the gathering. The old vet hurried to Lane's side, looking more weathered than ever. "Go with her," he said firmly. "I'll handle things here." Lane hesitated. "Midnight will be protected," Callahan promised. "Jensen, and I won't let anything happen to him. Evelyn needs you now." With a final glance at the black wolf standing sentinel at the forest edge, Lane climbed into the helicopter beside the paramedics working over his wife. As they lifted off, he watched the figures below grow smaller, the knot of men around the vehicles, Callahan gesturing emphatically, and at the perimeter, Midnight's dark form motionless, watching till the helicopter disappeared over the mountain. Lane had no way of knowing then that this crisis marked both an ending and a beginning, the climax of a strange bond with Midnight, and the start of an even stranger chapter in their intertwined lives. All he knew, holding Evelyn's cold hand, was that somehow, against all logic, their fates had become inextricably linked. The year following Evelyn's collapse became the darkest period of Lane's life. The helicopter had rushed her to Missoula Regional Medical Center, where doctors stabilized her immediate cardiac crisis, only to discover the cancer had aggressively metastasized throughout her body. What had appeared to be a successful remission had been masking a silent. The cancer had spread, the oncologist said quietly, away from the room's sterile hum, in a narrow hospital corridor. 6 months, maybe less. Mason's heart clenched. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood. At this stage, we can only offer palliative care." Mason refused to accept the verdict. He hunted down second opinions, experimental therapies, clinical trials, anything that promised even a flicker of hope. Meanwhile, Haley grew weaker each day, her vibrant spirit dimmed beneath the haze of painkillers, her body drained by relentless treatments. In those brutal early weeks, Mason never left the hospital, save when rules forced him away. Their cabin sat empty, frozen in time, the life they had built suspended in his absence. It was Dr. Calloway who finally convinced him to return home, if only briefly. "You need one night in your own bed," the vet insisted, offering to drive him. "Just one night. I'll bring you back tomorrow." Exhausted, Mason agreed. The drive from Missoula to Pinehurst blurred past, twisting mountain roads framed by fading autumn leaves. Pulling up to the cabin, Mason noticed how quickly neglect had settled. Leaves piled against the porch steps. Wind scattered firewood from the tidy stack he'd left behind. But what caught his eye most was a patrol along the property's edge. Fresh wolf tracks circled the land, some no older than hours. "He's been keeping watch," porch, Calloway said, following Mason's gaze to the unmistakable three-toed print. All this time, Mason asked. The vet nodded. Every night, according to Thompson, the research team has been observing from a distance. Inside, the cabin was untouched but cold, the absence of daily life hanging heavy in the stale air and dust. Mason built a fire while Calloway warmed coffee on the wood stove. They sat quietly until the flames crackled and mugs were filled. Tell me what happened after we left, Mason finally said. Calloway's face darkened in the firelight. All hell broke loose. Tanner was dead set on killing Shadow, federal protection or not. Called it a mercy kill for a rabid animal. The vet's lips twisted bitterly. Thompson had to hold him back, while the wildlife team tried to control the situation. Shadow vanished into the woods the moment your helicopter disappeared. Smart enough to know when to retreat, Calloway added, sipping his coffee. But he came back that night and every night since. Mason moved to the window, peering into the dark forest. Why? What's he waiting for? For Haley, Calloway answered simply. Or maybe for you. I'm not sure even Shadow knows. They sat in silence as the fire popped softly. Finally, Mason asked the question that had gnawed at him. Could he have been helping her? Doc Haley believed Shadow was somehow healing her. Calloway set down his mug with care. I've been researching that since you first mentioned it. Legends across cultures speak of wolves with healing powers. Most doctors dismiss it as folklore, but you don't. I'm a vet, not an oncologist, but I've lived long enough to know science hasn't explained everything. Calloway hesitated. The plants I've studied in Shadow's territory contain unusual compounds, immune modulators, natural anti-inflammatories. Whether they actually affected Haley, I can't say for sure. She was better when he was near, Mason insisted. You saw her blood work. I did. It defied logic. Calloway leaned forward. Mason, there's something about Shadow I should have told you years ago. Before he could speak further, a long, mournful howl broke the night stillness. Both men turned toward the window. Mason caught Shadow's silhouette at the tree lean, lit by the rising moon. He knows you're back, Calloway whispered. Without hesitation, Mason stepped onto the porch. The cold bit through his thin hospital clothes, but he barely noticed. Shadow waited at the forest's edge, those sharp amber eyes fixed on him. I have to go to him, Mason said. Be careful, Calloway warned. He's still wild. The distance to the tree lean felt both endless and immediate. Mason moved slowly, hands open and visible, stopping about 10 yards from the wolf. Shadow looked thinner, his coat duller, as if the weeks had weighed on him, too. She's sick, Mason said aloud, feeling foolish for talking to a wolf, but unable to stop himself. Haley's very sick. She might not. His voice cracked. Shadow tilted his head, ears forward, listening. Then, deliberately, he turned and padded a few steps into the forest, glancing back at Mason. You want to follow? The wolf disappeared deeper into the trees. Mason glanced back at the cabin, where Calloway watched from the porch, then made his choice. He followed. Shadow led him through winding paths cloaked in darkness. His black coat blended with the night, visible only by the occasional flash of amber eyes looking back to check Mason was still there. After 20 minutes, they arrived at a small clearing Mason hadn't seen before, not more than a mile from his property. At its center stood a massive old pine, scarred by lightning but still alive. Around its base, Shadow had created something remarkable, a carefully arranged circle of objects. Deer antlers in a semicircle, smooth river stones in patterns, colorful feathers, and in the center, a cluster of small blue flowers Mason didn't recognize, blooming despite the season. As Mason approached, puzzled, Shadow nudged the flowers with his nose and looked up at him expectantly. What is this? Mason whispered. Calloway's voice startled him from behind. The vet had followed quietly. It's a medicine wheel, or something like it. Native traditions. I've only read about such things. Shadow touched the blue flowers again, then looked pointedly at Mason. Those are wolf's bane, Calloway said, keeping a respectful distance. Not actually poisonous to wolves. Despite the name, it's used in traditional medicine for various purposes. Mason knelt beside the flowers. He wants me to take them. Be careful, Calloway warned. These arrangements hold meaning to him, a significance we might not understand. Gently, Mason gathered the blue flowers. Shadow made no move to stop him, watching with what Mason could only interpret as approval. What am I supposed to do with these? Mason asked, glancing between the wolf and the vet. Calloway shook his head. I don't know. Their strained communion shattered by a rifle shot echoing through the forest, followed by shouting men. Hunters, Calloway hissed. They're not supposed to be in this sector at night. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Shadow growled low in his throat, looking at Mason one last time before vanishing into the shadows. We need to go, Calloway urged, pulling Mason's arm. If they find us here, I can't leave him. You're not helping by getting shot yourself. Come on. They hurried back toward the cabin as the hunters' voices faded behind them. Mason clutched a small bouquet of flowers, still a mystery, in his hand. At dawn, Carter returned to Missoula with Dr. Emery, the blue flowers carefully wrapped in a damp cloth. He didn't tell Lila about them right away, uncertain how to explain or what to say. But that night, as she slept fitfully in her hospital bed, he placed one of the flowers in a small cup of water on her bedside table. By morning, the flower had wilted, but Lila's fever had broken for the first time in weeks. Days passed, then weeks. Carter brought more of the blue flowers, and though each batch wilted quickly, Lila's strength ebbed and flowed with their presence. It wasn't a cure. The cancer remained stubborn and invasive, but it seemed to grant her respite from the worst of the pain, allowing moments of clarity between medication doses. During one such moment, she gripped Carter's hand with surprising strength. "Shadow," she whispered. "He's trying to help me." "I know," Carter admitted, "but I don't understand how or why." "Because we're his family," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We saved him. Now he's trying to save me." In late November, a month after Lila's collapse, Shadow disappeared. Carter's game cameras captured no images. Emery's tracking team found no sign. The wolf had vanished as completely as he had 7 years earlier after Carter rescued him from the trap without the spirit flowers. Lila declined rapidly. By Christmas, she had been moved to hospice care. The doctor spoke in hushed tones about making her comfortable and managing expectations. Carter stayed by her side, sleeping in a chair beside her bed, leaving only to shower in the hospital facilities. On New Year's Day, Carter returned from one such brief absence to find Sheriff Dalton standing outside Lila's room. "What are you doing here?" Carter asked, too exhausted for pleasantries. Dalton removed his hat, his expression uncharacteristically troubled. "I'm sorry to bother you at a time like this, Blackwood, but there's been an incident. I thought you should know." "What kind of incident?" "Your wolf," Dalton said. "Shadow. Tanner claims he shot him yesterday evening near Carson Ridge. Said the animal attacked his hunting party unprovoked." Carter felt the world tilt beneath him. "Is it really him?" "Tanner says he hit him center mass. Watch him go down. But there was a snowstorm moving in. By the time they reached the spot, there was nothing there. No body, no blood trail." Dalton studied Carter's face. "I thought you might want to know. For what it's worth, I hope Tanner's lying. Always was a trigger-happy fool." Carter barely heard the sheriff's parting words of condolence for Lila. All he could think was that Shadow was gone, perhaps dead, perhaps fled to nurse his wounds in solitude at the moment when Lila needed him most. That night, sitting beside his sleeping wife, Carter finally allowed himself to weep for Lila, for Shadow, for the strange bond that connected them all, now severed when it mattered most. 6 months after Shadow's disappearance, Carter sat alone on his cabin porch, watching the summer sunset paint the western sky in shades of crimson and gold. The wildflowers Lila had planted years ago bloomed in riotous profusion along the walkway, untended but resilient. A half-empty whiskey glass dangled from his fingers. The ice long melted. 3 months had passed since Lila's funeral. The small Piner cemetery had overflowed with mourners, her students, their parents, colleagues from the school, even residents who'd barely known her but had been touched by her warmth. Carter had stood dry-eyed through the service, having exhausted his tears during the long hospital vigil. Sheriff Dalton had attended, as had Dr. Emery, and surprisingly Ranger Thompson. Frederick Tanner and his hunting companions had been conspicuously absent. The cabin felt cavernous without Lila's presence. Carter had considered selling it, moving somewhere, anywhere else, but inertia held him in place. Or perhaps it was something more, a stubborn hope that Shadow might return, that the connection was entirely severed. The telephone's shrill ring broke the evening stillness. Carter considered ignoring it, but finally rose with a sigh. "Blackwood," he answered. "Carter." Dr. Emery's voice sounded strained. "Urgent. I need to see you tonight. It's important. I'm not really up for company. Document. It's about Shadow." 20 minutes later, Emery's Bronco rumbled up the drive. The vet looked older than his 65 years. Deep exhaustion etched into his weathered face. He carried a battered leather satchel clutched tightly as he approached. "Thanks for seeing me," he said as Carter met him on the porch. "You mentioned Shadow." Emery nodded, glancing nervously at the surrounding forest as if expecting eavesdroppers. "Inside, if you don't mind." One seated at Carter's kitchen table. The vet opened his satchel and withdrew a folder thick with documents. "I've been doing research since we lost Lila. Things I should have investigated years ago." "What things?" "The connection between Shadow and this territory, the flowers, the healing properties." Emery spread several papers on the table. Old maps, photocopied journal pages, wildlife reports. "I think I've finally understood what Shadow is, or rather what he represents." Carter felt a flicker of impatience. "He's a black wolf, Doc, a rare subspecies." Emery said, "Yes, but that's not the whole story." He pointed to a yellowed map reproduction. "This area around Pinehurst, these mountains, it was sacred to Blackfoot and Kootenai tribes. They believed certain animals were not merely creatures, but guardians, vessels of protective spirits." "I'm not following." "Black wolves were particularly significant. According to tribal legends, they were mediators between the human and spirit worlds. scouts, protectors of sacred places and certain chosen people. Emery's finger traced a circle on the map, roughly encompassing the territory around Carter's property. This area was considered a place of healing. The tribes would bring their sick here, conduct ceremonies using plants that grew nowhere else. The blue flowers, Carter said quietly. Emery nodded. Wolf's bane, but that's a European name. The Blackfoot called them spirit flowers. They only grow where the guardian wolves mark their territory. He looked up at Carter. I've tested them in my lab. They contain compounds I can't identify. Natural analgesics more potent than morphine. Immune stimulants unlike anything in medical literature. Carter rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. What does this have to do with Shadow? I think he's the last of a lineage. The guardians that protected this territory for generations, the large black wolves that were nearly hunted to extinction a century ago, weren't just a subspecies. They were, Emery hesitated. Well, they were special. Different. When you saved that pup 7 years ago, you created a bond. He recognized you and Lila as his new family, his new tribe, for lack of a better word. If he was such a powerful guardian, why couldn't he save Lila? Carter asked bitterly. Emery's expression softened. I think he tried. Mason, those patterns in the forest, the flowers he led you to, they were attempts to tap into healing knowledge his ancestors once carried. But the modern world, Calloway sighed, too much has been lost, too many of his kind killed, the chain of knowledge broken. Mason stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. This sounds like superstition. Document tribal legends, not medicine. I'm a scientist, Mason, Calloway said quietly. I don't dismiss indigenous knowledge just because it doesn't fit Western paradigms. He pulled another paper from his folder, a laboratory report. I sent samples of Shadow's fur, collected from around your property, to a specialized genetics lab. Had to call in favors to get it done discreetly. His DNA shows markers unlike any documented wolf population. Genetic variations that shouldn't exist. Calloway took a deep breath. Traits suggesting accelerated evolution, for lack of a better term. Natural selection operating at an unprecedented rate, concentrated in specific genes linked to intelligence, memory, and glandular functions. Mason returned to the table, curiosity dulling his skepticism. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying Shadow represents something science hasn't fully documented yet. A highly specialized evolutionary branch of wolf, adapted specifically to this ecosystem, with unusual capabilities we're only beginning to understand. Calloway met Mason's eyes. And I'm not the only one who knows this. There's someone else hunting Shadow. Someone who understands exactly what he is. Who? Mason asked, incredulous. Calloway's voice dropped. Me. I was the one who set the trap you found Shadow in 7 years ago. Mason stared, shock rooting him in place. You. Calloway's shoulders slumped. I wasn't always the man I am today. 30 years ago, I was involved with people who trafficked exotic animals, rare specimens for private collectors, and traditional medicine markets in Asia. The black wolves of this region fetched astronomical prices. You were a poacher, Mason said flatly. Yes, no excuses, no justification. The admission hung heavy between them. We hunted the last known breeding pair of black wolves here in these mountains. The female was pregnant. I shot her myself. His voice cracked. She fled, wounded, must have given birth before she died. Shadow was her pup. A cold rage built inside Mason. You knew all along? You knew what Shadow was the moment I brought him to you. I suspected. Couldn't be certain until he grew older, developed the distinctive markings. Calloway avoided Mason's gaze. By then, I'd left that life behind. Been trying to atone, working with conservation groups, using my veterinary practice to protect the animals I once hunted. Why tell me this now? Because Shadow isn't dead. Calloway's eyes brightened with urgency. Tanner missed any vital organs. The shot wounded him, but a local hunter found blood trails leading north into deep wilderness. Shadow was moving under his own power, heading back to ancestral territory where he could heal. Mason's heart thundered. How do you know this? I've been tracking him with Thompson's help, using methods. Calloway hesitated. Methods that respect what he is. Following signs most modern trackers wouldn't recognize. And you found him? Not exactly. But we found evidence. Recent kills with his distinctive marks. Arrangements like those you saw in the clearing. He's alive, Mason. And I think he's coming back. Hope and anger warred within Mason. Why would he come back? Haley's gone. I couldn't protect her or him because this is still his territory. You're still his family. Calloway reached across the table, his weathered hand brushing Mason's arm. There's more. She wasn't alone at the end. What are you talking about? I was with her every day. The night before she passed, Calloway said quietly, when you finally left the shower and changed, the hospital security cameras caught something in the garden outside inside her hospice room. Something large and dark watching through her window. He swallowed hard. The footage is blurry, but Thompson and I reviewed it. It was Shadow. He found her, Mason. He came to say goodbye. Mason felt his carefully built composure crack. The image of Shadow keeping vigil outside Haley's room was more than he could bear. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I wasn't sure what it meant, whether it would bring you comfort or more pain. Calloway gathered his documents, hands trembling. But now there's something else. Something urgent. What? The female Black Wolf, Shadow's mother. I always believed she died from my bullet, but Thompson found evidence suggesting otherwise. She may have survived, gone deep into the wilderness to raise her pup. And if that's true, then Shadow isn't the last, Mason whispered. No, Calloway stood, energy suddenly coursing through his tired frame. That's why he disappeared when he did. Not just because he was wounded, but because he was answering a call. The call to mate to ensure his bloodline continues. Mason moved back to the window, staring into the darkening forest. If you're right, why tell me? Why not just let him stay wild, where he belongs? Because there are others looking for him now. Calloway joined him at the window. Tanner has organized a massive hunt. Convinced Shadow killed his prize hunting dog last month. He's offering a $5,000 bounty. And worse, my old contacts in the exotic animal trade have caught wind of Shadow's existence. They're sending professionals, men who won't miss, who won't care about federal protections or endangered species. The weight of the truth settled over Mason like a physical burden. What can I do? I'm just one man. You're not just any man to Shadow, Calloway said firmly, placing a hand on Mason's shoulder. You're the one he trusts. Help me find him first. Help me protect what he's trying to build. As darkness swallowed the mountains, Mason made his choice. Shadow had tried to save Haley. Now Mason would try to save Shadow, and maybe, in doing so, find a purpose to fill the emptiness Haley's death had left behind. When do we start? Mason asked. Calloway's reply was cut short by a sound from outside. A long, haunting howl vibrating through the cabin's very foundation. But this time, something was different. As the first howl faded, a second voice answered, higher, more melodic. Shadow had returned, and he wasn't alone. Mason stood on the ridge overlooking the valley where his cabin rested among the pines. Dawn's soft amber light bathed the land. 5 months had passed since that night. He heard Shadow's howl joined by another voice. 5 months of purpose, danger, and unexpected healing. Beside him, Dr. Calloway adjusted his binoculars, eyes scanning the tree below. The old veterinarian had become Mason's unlikely partner in a cause that had transformed them both. In the valley beyond, Ranger Thompson worked with 3 Forest Service volunteers, setting the final boundary markers for what would soon be the Carson Ridge Wolf Sanctuary, a 12,000-acre protected refuge encompassing Shadow's territory. Movement at the eastern perimeter. Thompson's voice crackled over the radio. Looks like our boy is making his morning rounds. Mason lifted his own binoculars, focusing on the spot Thompson indicated. Even at this distance, Shadow was unmistakable, massive and midnight black against the pale spring grass, moving with a powerful grace despite his 3-legged gait. Behind him, cautious but no less striking, came his mate, a coal black female with a distinctive white blaze on her chest. Smaller than Shadow, but still formidable. Luna's with him, Mason noted, using the name they'd given Shadow's companion, but no sign of the pups. She'll have them safely hidden, Calloway replied. Still too young to travel far from the den. Another month and we'll see more. The radio crackled again. Sheriff Walker's voice came through, tense. We've got a situation developing on the North Access Road. Tanner's group is back. At least 6 vehicles. They're armed and ignoring our checkpoint. Mason exchanged a glance with Calloway. Frederick Tanner had spent the winter trying to sabotage their conservation efforts, filing legal challenges, spreading rumors about dangerous predators, and organizing aggressive hunting parties that pushed the boundaries of the proposed sanctuary. I'm on my way, Mason said, already moving toward the ATV park nearby. Thompson, get your team to the secondary perimeter. Doc, head back to base camp and alert fish and wildlife. The months since Haley's death had reshaped Mason in ways he never expected. His military training, once a burden filled with painful memories, had become a vital asset protecting Shadow's growing family. The conservation project gave him a mission, a way to honor Haley's memory and the extraordinary bond they shared with the Black Wolf. As Mason navigated the rough terrain toward the North Road, he reflected on how much had changed. The town of Talenest, once deeply divided over the Devil Wolf, had slowly shifted. The economic benefits of the sanctuary were clear. Wildlife photographers, research grants, and ecotourism breathing new life into the struggling community. Even Sheriff Walker, once suspicious of Mason and Shadow alike, had become a cautious ally, enforcing sanctuary boundaries and keeping Tanner's hunters in check. The North Access Road came into view, two, and with it, the confrontation. 6 pickup trucks had forced their way past the Forest Service barrier. Their occupants now stood locked in a tense standoff with Walker and 2 deputies. Frederick Tanner stood at the center, a high-powered rifle cradled in his arms, his face flushed with anger beneath a camouflage cap. This is still public land. Tanner shouted as Mason approached. You can't stop American citizens from exercising their legal right to hunt. This area is under a federal protection order pending sanctuary designation. Walker replied evenly. And you know damn well black wolves are a protected species. Wolves, Tanner sneered. That thing isn't just a wolf. Everyone knows it. He spotted Mason dismounting from the ATV and pivoted toward him. Here's the man behind it all. Tell them, Blackwood. Tell them what that creature really is. Mason approached slowly, hands visible. Several of Tanner's companions shifted nervously, weapons not quite aimed but ready. Morning, Fred, Mason said calmly. Beautiful day to be heading home. Don't you think? Don't patronize me. Tanner spat on the ground. That animal killed 3 more of my dogs last month, tore up Miller's fence, and I've got report of cattle harassed at the Peterson place. We've investigated every one of those incidents, Walker interjected. The dog deaths were mountain lion attacks, confirmed by Fish and Wildlife. Miller's fence was damaged by spring flooding. Peterson said his cattle were spooked by coyotes, not wolves. Lies to protect that thing, Tanner insisted, voice rising. It isn't natural what Blackwood's got living out here. Mason recognized a dangerous edge in Tanner's tone. A man pushed his breaking point by fear and resentment. He'd seen similar volatility in combat, knew how quickly it could explode into violence. Fred, Mason said quietly, what's this really about? What's this really about? Mason asked quietly, you've hunted these mountains for 30 years. You know the difference between wolf, cougar, and coyote sign. This isn't like you. For a moment, something flickered in Tanner's eyes, uncertainty, maybe even shame. Then one of the companions, a younger man Mason didn't recognize, stepped forward. Show him the video. The young man said, Fred, show him what we caught on the game cam. Tanner hesitated, then nodded. The man pulled a tablet from his jacket. Recorded 3 nights ago, up by Carson Creek. Tanner said, voice subdued. Never seen anything like it in 40 years of hunting. Not natural. Mason took the tablet, feeling Sheriff Walker move closer to watch over his shoulder. The night vision footage showed a moonlit clearing by the creek. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then shadow appeared at the edge of the frame, followed by Luna. The wolves moved deliberately toward the clearing center, where they began digging at the soft earth. Just wolves caching food, Walker commented. Normal behavior. Keep watching, Tanner said grimly. The footage continued. After digging a shallow hole, Shadow disappeared briefly, then returned carrying something in his mouth, one of the blue flowers. He carefully placed in the hole, then another and another, until a small cluster was arranged. Luna brought small, smooth stones, placing them around the flowers in a pattern that couldn't be random. When their work was done, both wolves sat on either side of the arrangement and raised their heads in unison, releasing a howl that, even without sound, felt different from any ordinary wolf vocalization. The footage ended abruptly. A heavy silence fell over the group. Mason handed the tablet back to Tanner, choosing his words carefully. Wolves are intelligent animals, Fred. More intelligent than we've given them credit for. They're capable of behaviors we don't fully understand. That's not just intelligence, Tanner said, though the aggressive edge had faded from his voice. That's something else. What it is, Dr. Calloway said as he approached on foot from the tree lean, is an ancient behavior pattern not documented in nearly a century. He nodded respectfully to Tanner. May I? After a moment's hesitation, Tanner gestured for the young man to show Calloway the video. Remarkable, Calloway murmured. The Blackfoot called this medicine making. They believe certain wolves, the guardian wolves, created sacred sites that concentrated healing energies. He looked up at the hunters. Modern science might say they're identifying and cultivating plants with medicinal properties, maybe teaching young wolves which plants matter. Behavior passed down through generations, like wolf pharmacists. One hunter scoffed. More like wolf culture, Thompson said, joining from the other direction. Animals passing knowledge through generations. We see it in elephants, primates, cetaceans. Why not wolves who evolved in isolation with specific plant resources? Mason watched his understanding slowly replace fear on some of Tanner's men, though not all. Doesn't matter what you call it, Tanner said stubbornly. It's unnatural. Dangerous. What's dangerous, Mason said, is fear of what we don't understand. I was afraid too, Fred. After Haley got sick, after Shadow disappeared, I wanted something to blame. He met Tanner's gaze steadily. But fear doesn't honor her memory. Protection does. Conservation does. Tanner's grip on his rifle tightened, then relaxed. Your wife was a good woman, Blackwood. Taught my grandson art at the elementary school. Always had time for the boy, even when she was sick. A flicker of respect crossed his weathered face. She believed in the sanctuary idea of yours. It was her dream, really, to protect this place. It wasn't entirely entirely true. Thompson had made the formal proposal, but Mason knew Haley would have embraced it wholeheartedly. Cameras. The first few showed Shadow and Luna with their growing pups, playful and strong, but the last image stopped Mason cold. It was Haley's garden beside the cabin, the wildflowers she had planted, now bursting into glorious bloom. At the center of the frame sat Shadow, perfectly still, his amber eyes locked on the camera, as if he knew Mason would someday see this. Beside him, arranged with deliberate care, was a small cluster of those same blue flowers, Wolf's Bane, set in a perfect circle. He brought those all the way from the high country, Calloway said softly. Thompson added, the nearest growth is over 5 miles from here. Mason felt a tightness in his throat as he studied the image. What was Shadow trying to tell them? I think, Calloway said carefully, he's saying Haley is still part of his pack, still part of his territory, the territory he remembers. As if on cue, a howl rose from the forest edge, a deep, distinctive call. This time it was answered not only by Luna's voice, but by the higher-pitched yips of the pups, weaving together in a wild harmony that echoed to the gathering dusk. Mason closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. It wasn't just the call of wolves. It was the voice of the mountains themselves, of a healing land, of continuity, of a promise kept. I think you're right, Duck, Mason said, opening his eyes to the darkening forest. I think he remembers, and so do I. In the distance, headlights appear on the mountain trail. Ranger Thompson's Jeep bringing the evening shift of sanctuary volunteers. Beyond them, the lights of Pinehurst twinkled in the valley, no longer hostile territory, but part of the growing circle of protection around Shadow's domain. Mason rose slowly, feeling the familiar ache in his old leg wound, but now welcoming it as a reminder of survival, of endurance. Come on, he said to Calloway. Let's go check on our wolves. As they walked toward Thompson's approaching vehicle, Mason glanced back at the cabin porch where he and Haley had spent so many evenings watching the sunset, at the garden she had tended with such care. He would never stop missing her, never stop loving her, but in protecting this extraordinary creature who had tried to save her, Mason had found a way forward, a purpose that honored everything they had shared. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, Shadow watched over them all, the last guardian of an ancient lineage and the first of a new beginning in the twilight of our lives. We learn that true healing often comes from the most unexpected places. Mason's journey reminds us that grief doesn't end. It transforms, like Shadow, wounded but resilient, return and fulfill a greater purpose. How many of us have faced unimaginable loss only to discover that service to something larger than ourselves provides a path forward? The connections we forge with loved ones, with nature, with creatures wild and domestic, remain unbroken, even when death separates us physically. Mason couldn't save Haley, but by protecting Shadow's legacy, he honored her spirit and found meaning amid devastating loss. This story speaks to all who have loved and lost, who understand how loyalty transcends species and time, who recognize the healing power of wilderness, and who believe some bonds are simply too powerful to ever die. When Mason finally accepted that moving forward didn't mean leaving Haley behind, he discovered a profound truth. Our deepest wounds can become our greatest purpose. The guardian wolves remind us that we too are guardians of memories of wild places, of hope itself, even in our darkest hours.